Welcome to Off the Shelf, where we take you on the most spectacular adventures, talk about salacious romances, dive deep into the latest true crime, and break down the most anticipated memoirs. Hey y'all, welcome back to Off the Shelf. Today on the episode, we have Anna Reyes, who is the author of The House in the Pines and a fellow LSU Tiger. So everybody, please welcome her. Anna, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. This has been a long time coming. Obviously, your debut novel was such a hit and such a favorite of ours. So we're so excited to have you on. But first and foremost, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started as a writer?
So I got started as a reader when I was a kid. I was a huge reader. I loved Fear Street and Christopher Pike and anything spooky or creepy. So I was a reader long before I was a writer. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I decided I wanted to give it a shot. And I went back to school. I went to LSU. They have a fabulous MFA graduate program. And it was there that I actually wrote the first draft of this book.
That is incredible. So, did you have that writing in you already? Were you trying to figure out, how to even go about that? Because I love writing. I love books. I love writing, but I think both novel writing and script writing are so specific and it's like an art in and of itself. So did you know how to do that in the beginning, or did this MFA really help hone that in?
I've always been drawn to writing. Even when I was younger, I sort of had this urge to write. But I was mostly writing poems and short stories and things that were just kind of spur of the moment, what I was feeling, a lot of journaling. It wasn't until I went to LSU that I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try to write a novel. And that was really the longest thing I ever wrote.
That's so amazing. That's so amazing that you just were like, let's do this again. We're going to go back to school and we're going to learn from the start how to do this. I think that is so honorable. And I think that goes to show that it's one of those things that, especially, in the industry that I'm in, there is not a specific age for you to create your debut, whatever it is you're going to do. You know what I mean? Because I feel like it's so easy to say you should have started young to really be where you want to be now, but it can happen at any time. And I think that is such a motivation to creatives and young writers everywhere to just start, just do it, and give it a go without that fear, which I think is so exciting. This book, as I mentioned, is your debut novel, and it's obviously made such a huge impression on readers and our fellow book lover, Reese Witherspoon, as she made it one of her book club picks, which is so incredible. What is The House in the Pines about? Briefly give us a synopsis.
The House in the Pines, it's a psychological thriller, and it's about a young woman in Boston. Her name's Maya, and she's trying to move on with her life after a difficult past when she comes across a video on YouTube of a young woman at a diner sitting across from Maya's ex-boyfriend, a man named Frank. So they're at the diner, and all of a sudden, the young woman drops dead. Nobody knows what killed her. There's no explanation, no murder weapon, no obvious sign. And Maya's convinced that Frank killed her. And the reason she thinks this is that 7 years ago, the exact same thing happened to her best friend, Aubrey. Aubrey was talking to Frank. She dropped dead. No one knows what killed these women, but Maya's convinced that Frank somehow did it. So it's less of a who done it than a how did it. How did he kill these women? Could he have done it? Nobody believes Maya when she says that he did it because there's no weapon, there's no obvious way. So it's a mystery. And in order to figure out what Frank's secret is, she has to return to her hometown. And more specifically, she has to return to the House in the Pines, which is a mysterious cabin that Frank built way out in the woods.
So it's so funny that you say that when you were younger, thrillers and all these like, mysteries were really what brought your love for reading in. I would avoid those so hard because they would literally give me nightmares. And this book, it was crazy. It was like art imitating life. The first day I read it, I was like, I cannot read this at night anymore. I had the most vivid dream. And then as I kept reading it, I was like, oh my God, like things are happening to her too. Um, so kudos to you. That was it was so thrilling. And Nicole is a huge thriller mystery type reader. So we were really excited to get to this. And I feel like in the last few months, especially since starting off the shelf and our book club, us getting really into everything on a monthly basis, we brought these thriller psychological books in, and I think they're so smart and they really make you think in a different way than your average rom-com. You know what I mean? Those are easy. And I think that even readers are like, what is something quick that I can read just to loosen up? But these, they really make you think. And I think it's so beautiful because I think like as an actor, I always want something that is so that has such great character depth when picking out a story or reading a script. And these are the types of stories that allow you to create that character depth and then that incredible backstory that you can bring in to bring these characters to life at the end of the day. So absolutely the coolest. Just I love that. I'm loving these books again. And I think you give it to us in such a subtle way. You don't just like slap us in the face with like fear. But I think that is probably my favorite part. This story has so many moments that are and or maybe can be perceived as factual, which you kind of mentioned in the research you did in your acknowledgement that you did go to certain places to kind of really get more information. So how much of this story is factual and how much of it is fiction?
So most of it is fiction, but Maya, the character, has a lot in common with me, and that was just sort of the result of I was writing what I knew. So Maya is half Guatemalan, and I am also half Guatemalan. Her father is dead. My father, thankfully, is alive. But that was sort of the place where we start off the same. Maya is part of her journey is to learn more about her culture because unlike me, she wasn't able to know it growing up. So that's factual. The other part that I took from my own life was the Klonopin withdrawal. So when I was experiencing some insomnia in my 20s, I went to a doctor who prescribed me Klonopin and didn't warn me how addictive it was and didn't cut me off at a certain point. He just kept prescribing it and prescribing it, and it does help you sleep. So I took it every night for years. And then when I moved to Louisiana, I had to go off of it all of a sudden because my new doctor refused to prescribe it. So all of a sudden, I was plunged into Klonopin withdrawal. And I didn't even know, I had no preparation for this because I didn't know how addictive it was. Nobody warned me. So as I was writing this book, I was dealing with Klonopin withdrawal, and writing the book actually helped me through it because it was something that I was able to write about what I was going through, but it was happening to Maya, my character, not to me. And having it happen to her instead of me gave me a perspective that I didn't have before. And I found that I was able to have, at times, more compassion for her than for myself. Because there was a lot of blaming of myself where I felt like, I'm going through this. It was my fault. I got hooked on the sleeping medication and now I'm dealing with this thing. But when it was happening to her, I was able to say, well, it's not completely her fault. This could happen to anyone. So having compassion for her allowed me to kind of have compassion for myself and also eventually to work through it on the page. As it happened, it was a perfect device for an unreliable narrator. So it ended up working out in the end. But originally that was there because it was just my experience. And it was what I was going through. Her experience is more extreme. I heightened it for dramatic purposes, but it is ultimately based on my own experience.
That's incredible. I absolutely love, thank you so much for sharing um so honestly with us, because that was another thing that in this book I thought um was so important, was what this woman was going through with this, with this drug per se, for helping her with her anxiety, her insomnia, everything that she's really dealing with on this emotional level, especially after seeing her friend just keel over in front of her at such a young age. Um, but also the the whole idea um of like the hallucinations that she's having, the hypnotism. I feel like we don't really hear about that much, that it almost seems like old school. Like, in the therapy world, when, now that I'm in therapy, I'm like, oh wow, that's never been offered to me, but I'm like, whoa, maybe I wouldn't want something that extreme. Um, but I think that's so fascinating, and how you were able to intertwine both of those very extreme situations, to two incredibly different individuals, but then at some point, the realization that both affected her, when she kind of came to and was able to process what had happened to her over the years, because the Klonopin definitely distorted those memories for her in some way or another. Um, so yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredible. Discussing how well, first and foremost, as I was saying, I don't know if you were able to hear this, but I wanted to thank you for sharing so honestly about your Klonopin story. And I think it's such an intriguing and important part, because that is so rarely discussed, with the hallucinations and the oh my gosh, I lost my word, the hypnotism that happens. I go to therapy regularly, and I feel like hypnotism, it seems to be such an old school method of therapy these days. But because I'm just like, oh, that's never been offered to me, but then I'm like, but I wouldn't want it to be offered at that extreme. But I do think that the fact that she has that realization that hypnotism affected her, because for her it was all to do with her Klonopin, journey. And she was like, maybe it was this, like I wasn't lucid enough for this. I was drinking, I was, drugging myself in order to not feel at the end of the day. And to have her come off of it in a very difficult way, but then have such an awareness of what had happened to her years prior, it's like her memory started to open up with it, I think is so interesting. And like I said, it's such a journey that's so rarely discussed, that I think individuals, as much as this is fiction, I think those are real situations that happen, without people even realizing it's happening, to some extent. But I did want to touch on the fact that, you were discussing that although fiction, there was some truth with the fact that you were able to incorporate your Latinidad in the story. And I absolutely love how you did it in such a subtle way, where it wasn't such a label on who Maya was. And I think sometimes stories about ourselves become such a label, as opposed to just a part of the life that we live and the individual that we become in life. So I'm always so curious about that, because I was saying it's not very common in our community to tell stories in this manner. So what was the intent behind that? So you're half Guatemalan. What else are you?
My mom is Irish,
Okay.
kind of a Caucasian European blend. Uh,
Okay.
so like me, Maya is half Guatemalan and half white.
Okay.
And I think for her, she's less in touch with her
Mhm.
Latinidad, because she never knew her father. So for me, like I'm very much more in touch with my own Latinidad, because
Yes.
I have my whole family. I go to Guatemala pretty regularly. But for her, she's just not in touch with that part of her culture. So it made sense to write this character who doesn't really express herself. She doesn't express her culture, I should say. As much as like you're saying, you might see in another story about a character whose heritage is part of the story.
Right.
So part of her story is learning about her own heritage. And I think maybe is that sort of what you mean? Like it seems like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I think, and and when I say that, it's I'm Honduran American, but like my parents are both Honduran. My family kind of comes from Spain, is kind of how they ended up there. But I was born and raised in southern Louisiana. So although my culture is so instilled in me, I have had a very different upbringing than, say, the cast members I got to work on, on Hintified. So it's always so interesting to me how individuals, especially Latinos, no matter how you're Latino, express that, because your story is so all encompassing and you're writing what you know. And I think that like writers in the industry as well, Latinos, they are writing what they know, but the experience for me is so removed. And I always find that so interesting, because when I read a story where the culture is so prevalent, but it's so subtle, as like it's a part of who I am, I just live it, and yet I don't have it, I don't need it to be like a stamp on my forehead. So I just I think I appreciate that, because I was raised in such a different manner. So it allows me to relate to these stories a little bit more, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think so. I think so. And I know what you mean. Like I was born here. I was born in Texas, and so in a lot of ways, I identify as a Texan. I identify as, I went to school in Massachusetts, so I identify very much as American. And in my culture, as a Guatemalan, is very much woven into all those
Yeah,
things. So it just feels like a part of who I am, and something that I kind of take with me everywhere I go.
exactly. No, and I absolutely love that. Did you want to make this character Hispanic because you were like, I almost want to create myself in some way. So like, would you, in a sense, write a character that was so unrelated to you, like as a writer?
I think for me, because I this was my first
This was
book.
yeah.
Yeah, I found that writing someone who was like myself felt most natural. And so
Yes.
for me, being half Guatemalan is a big part of my identity. And so it felt natural that I could write about that. I felt like I could write about a character who had that part of my identity. Um, I think that in the future, I'll probably continue to write Latino characters,
Yeah.
but they might not be so close to me. They might not be exactly half Guatemalan and half
Yeah.
white. They might be full Guatemalan, or they might be, maybe they're Mexican. So I think that this is something I'll definitely carry forward.
Yeah. No, I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think, yeah, when I pick up a story, I'm like, I need to relate to it in some way. If it has nothing of me, it's like, how do I jump into this character in any form? So you kind of have to find a little bit of yourself in order to really bring the story forward. Why hypnotherapy? Where did that come from? Like I said, I've never read a thriller or a storyline like this at all. And like I said, it fully affected me, because it kind of, in the story, it happens so fast. Like what's happening to them happens and occurs so quickly, that I had to tell myself, like, do not read this at night. Like I woke my husband up that night at like 3 a.m. I heard like water running, and I was like, wake up. I was like, somebody's in our house. And we have like an alarm system, and I was like, I didn't hear anything, but it's like my mind was here. It was so vivid. So, then it kind of brought me back to, oh my gosh, it's the book that I read. I was just like, I didn't do anything differently last night. So this book for sure, like I said, affected me in such an interesting and very visceral way. So why hypnotherapy?
Well, first, I take that as a huge compliment. I love to hear that people lost sleep over my book. Hypnotherapy is something I've always been interested in, and I should say that in general and as a rule, it's not dangerous. It's very safe. I did a lot of research into it. But one thing that I found really interesting is that hypnosis can actually affect the body. So hypnosis is currently being used to treat real physical symptoms, such as gastrointestinal disorders and other things that are very much in the body. And that's because the mind does have control over the body. And we know that because we know that high levels of mental stress can actually affect your heart rate, can lead to high blood pressure. So we know that what happens in the mind can affect the body. And as a thriller writer, my thought immediately went to, okay, so if we can use the mind to help heal the body, in the wrong hands, could somebody use the mind to hurt the body? Could somebody use the mind to actually kill a person? So that's where my mind went as a thriller writer. And I just thought that was a really fascinating question of, if this therapy can be used to help, can it also be used to hurt? And I just kind of ran with that with my imagination. But as I said, I don't think that anything like this has ever actually been done. But I think theoretically, it's something that could happen. Not maybe to the extent that it does, but it could be used to hurt a person.
Interesting. Okay, so that aspect of it was fictional.
Yes, the idea that it could be actually used to cause a person's death, I don't think that could probably happen. That was sort of the leap that I took.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm like, now it's kind of like all these like therapists are gonna be like, hide, 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 hide. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's very cool. And that's incredible that your mind went to such depths because, like you said, that is what a question, as this character, how you created Frank, he was very secretive of this. And the way that he even hypnotized his patients or another individual was so subtle. It was in simple conversation that you were like, oh my, like that's intense, right? To have such a power over another human. But as he would say, it has to be the right person, with the right imagination. And I get he like picks and chooses, which is also super intriguing to a character. And you're like, wow, it goes into such a whole of other scenarios and serial killer type situations. So yeah, you went very deep in that, and it absolutely scared me in the best way. Okay, so let's discuss this ending that was kind of open-ended, kind of like, okay, we might know what's going on. We assume what happened, right? And we create all these alternative type of endings, but what compelled you to leave it like that?
So at the time, I was thinking that, two things. The first thing is that because Frank uses hypnosis to kill people, major spoiler, so hopefully people.
Oh yeah, spoiler alert.
Because he uses hypnosis to kill people, nobody has ever done this before. And so as I was thinking through the process of what would it look like to prosecute Frank, I realized that this would be a very difficult uphill battle to actually prosecute someone like this, because there's no precedent, and because if he's in a room with somebody and they're interrogating him, he would be able to hypnotize them. He would probably be able to escape justice because he is so manipulative. So it would be a very difficult process to actually put him behind bars. Second, I felt that it might be scarier to think of him still out there. Yeah. So that's the reason that I left it open-ended. I don't intend to write a sequel. So in my mind, Frank eventually does end up behind bars. Okay. So that's sort of where I imagine it going. In my mind, the question of did he do it is answered. So I felt that the question of does he end up in jail was okay to leave open, but in retrospect, I realized that a lot of readers wanted to see him behind bars. They felt it would have been more satisfying. So that's definitely something that I'm taking into book 2, is sort of that understanding of like, when you write a thriller, there are a set of expectations, and I knew that going in, but I definitely know that now. So it's something that I think about is like that satisfying closure. My hope is that readers will feel satisfied knowing that, yes, he did it. He definitely did it. It's not in Maya's head. She's not crazy. But for anyone curious, yes, he would end up in jail.
It actually reminded me of Ashley Flower's book that she recently debuted as well, that we read as one of our book of the months. And it also kind of had an open-ended type of, ending. But it was one of those things that you're kind of like you said, it's just like you assume what's going to happen. And I don't think she's writing a sequel for this book. And as the Crime Junkies podcast, leader herself, for her to leave a thriller open ended, this made sense to me. But I was just curious as to what your thought process was there. And that is so true in what you said. It would be so difficult to prosecute him, because even when her mother finally believed her and she ended up going, to see the detective, she thought her mom was being hypnotized because she had the blank stare. She was so focused, and that scared her. And I was like, oh no, this is happening like through a recording. So very, very true. Like, of course, but of course, like, that's not what I'm thinking when I'm reading it. I'm like, but what happened to him? Like, is he gonna find her? But yes, there is that satisfaction to, okay, we all know, but it's also that idea of, but is she gonna really be safe in her life, so that's very interesting. um let's see here, what do you hope readers will take away from The House in the Pines?
I think the most thing, the primary thing is I want them to have a good time. It's a thriller. I think that sort of subconsciously I was inspired by Christopher Pike and the Fear Street books that I grew up reading.
Mhm.
And for me, those books were just a fun escape. When you're the new girl at school, which I often was because I moved around a lot. It's
Mhm.
really nice to just have a book where you feel at home. You read it, you're whisked into another world. So I think first and foremost, I want people to get lost in the book.
Mhm.
But I think it also has some themes about believing women. Part of this happened. I wrote this book post Me Too, and believing women is something that was on my mind. And Maya is not believed at first, and I think that that's something that is sort of one of the themes that I hope that people would take away from it.
That's so good. And that is so true, especially in the time we're in right now, because I feel like it's still so relevant, that topic. And especially in the industry that we work in the creative world, it can be very difficult. And then women are almost considered like second rate still, you know what I mean? In so many aspects of these industries. So that's so true. Is there a second novel that we can be anticipating? Are you writing something else? Can you share anything with us?
I am writing a second novel, and it's another thriller.
Oh,
It's also a psychological thriller, but I think the next one is a little more horror tinged. It's, I think,
yeah.
even scarier. I haven't shared what it's about yet, but I'm going to be hopefully doing that soon. I'm working on it now, and hopefully, knock on wood, I have a draft before too long.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, we're quickly going to do a few rapid fire questions, just super fun. Whatever comes to your mind first. Who is your favorite author?
This is such a so many, Angela Carter.
Okay. What is your favorite genre of music?
World music.
Okay. What was your first job?
I worked as a cashier at a Mexican restaurant called La Vera Cruzana.
Oh, yum. Did you get free food?
I did. I ate
Oh,
a lot of chicken burritos.
yes. So good. I love that so much. Okay. What is currently your favorite book out?
I love Circe, the book by Madeline Miller. That's one of my
Oh,
favorites that's out right now.
Can you tell us a little bit what it's about?
Oh yeah, so Circe is a book. It's a retelling of Greek myths, and it's just a really beautiful story about the gods, about Greek gods. But they're more human than a lot of stories that I read about humans. She does a beautiful job of character development, and she's just an incredibly beautiful writer.
Oh, I am writing that down. That's so exciting. I love, love, love Greek mythology. Um, and let's see, last question. The way to my heart is.
A really well cooked meal.
Oh, yum. Yes. I love that answer. Well, Anna, thank you so much for being here with us today. I appreciate you getting on early in the morning. I know we had some technical difficulties, but hey, that is part of life. And yeah, thank you for sharing your story and being so open about this. And again, to all who are watching, if you have not read The House in the Pines, go pick it up. It is such a good book, an incredible page turner. 5 out of 5. So again, such a fan, and I'm just a proud LSU alumni talking to another LSU
Go
alumni.
Tigers!
Yes. Thank you again for being here on Off the Shelf. We'll see you on the next episode.